First, let's talk politics now with the leader of the Labour Party, Phil Goff, with us this morning. Good morning, Phil.
G'day, Wammo.
And certainly this is a big day. Of course, you've got the first leaders' debate between you and John Key tonight. Big weekend. It's just been a whole lot of policies just been released. Let's get straight into it. The big roll of the dice from Labour is the raising of the retirement age, or the age of eligibility, isn't it, for the superannuation?
Yeah, people can retire any time they like.
Of course they can.
The age of eligibility to collect super.
From 65 to 67. Why?
Well, first of all, we know that we've got a huge problem coming up. The number of those of us going into retirement is going to double, so we're going to go from 500,000 to 1.3 million. That's 1 in 4 in the community that will be in retirement. And that means that the cost of super is going to double. I think by 2030, 20 years out, it's already going to be up into the 30s to $40 billion a year. And part of that is those of us that are going to live to over 85 is going to increase 500%. So we'll have 250,000 people over the age of 85 within the next few decades. Now, that means not just more super costs, it means greater costs on the health system. So we could sit here complacently saying it's not a problem for a couple of years, we'll do nothing, we'll wait for crisis to come, and then we'll panic and without any notice we'll suddenly get people working longer. Or we can do what the Retirement Commissioner advised last year, do it gradually, start in the year 2020, that's 9 years out, and complete it by 2033. That gives people plenty of time to adjust, and it's the fair way of doing it. We've decided to show the guts to take the decision that every New Zealander knows will have to be taken, but we're going to be upfront and tell Kiwis about it now, not pretend it's not there, which is what John Key's doing.
Okay, also changes to KiwiSaver as well, making that compulsory and also upping the contributions from employers. Some might say that was a little bit too expensive.
No, it's not too expensive. It's not something we can't afford. It's something we can't afford not to do. When Standard & Poor's downgraded New Zealand's credit rating a couple of weeks ago, the first time in 13 years, it said we had too few savings, too much debt, and we hadn't taken any steps to deal with an ageing population. That was their verdict. And as a result of their downgrading, immediately that's costing $100 million more to service our debt because our credit rating's gone down. So we can pretend to ignore this, but we're suffering the consequences. Look, we want everybody to have a comfortable retirement, and particularly those that at the moment go into retirement with nothing but their New Zealand super. You know, it's not a retirement to look forward to if you're only subsisting. So we're saying, look, somebody on the minimum wage, we're going to lift the minimum wage. We're going to give people more on the hand with the first 5,000 tax-free. But what they will do is they'll put in about $11 a week, starting, if they're in their 20s, they'll be putting $11 a week into their savings account. But by the time they are eligible to draw that at age 65, in the case of KiwiSaver, they'll have $400,000 to $440,000 in savings. Now, that's a retirement that even somebody on a low income now, putting in a smallish amount, will be able to look forward to retire on. And that makes a retirement comfortable as against watching every dollar that you have to spend.
John Key says, well, it sounds like typical Labour, more borrowing, more spending, and you're going to have to work longer as well.
Yeah, well, it's not those things, is it? He's the king of the borrowing. He inherited a government account that was $6 billion in the black, in surplus, and he's turned it into a $30 billion deficit. This year, spending $18 billion more than the government took in revenue. And what's he doing? He's borrowing. He's borrowing $330 million a week to pay for that. Now, half of it's the earthquake, and nobody's saying that the earthquake's the fault of government or anybody else, but the other half isn't. You can't keep borrowing. That's dragging the economy down, and the more we borrow from overseas savers, the more our future falls into the hands of foreign investors. We want to own our own future. The way we do that, we keep our assets, but we also have a savings scheme where we use our own money to develop our country, and we continue to own it.
But he says that, well, okay, yeah, we're going to partial sale some of these assets, but we're going to put some of this money into a special fund. We're going to improve schools, hospitals, that kind of stuff, the feel-good projects.
Well, all of those things are happening now. They're a core role of the government. And what he's saying is we're going to run down our assets for ongoing expenditure. But when he runs out of the first set of assets, and that's maybe $7 billion worth, and remember those $7 billion worth of assets would have paid for themselves with dividends over the course of a decade or more. When he's run out of that, what's he going to sell next to build the next school? You can't just keep running down your assets in order to replace normal things in hospitals or schools. Right now, those dividends give us, last year I think it was $900 million. That money went into schools, it went into hospitals, and the asset is still there, and it's still producing the dividend. He'll sell the asset, there'll be no more money coming in, he'll exhaust the pool when he's sold the dividend, and then he'll keep selling, because that's all he seems to know how to do.
Okay, yesterday you said Labour would get behind the $1.2 billion rail loop for Auckland at the expense of the Holiday Highway, although some people are saying, well, you're being a bit disingenuous with the term holiday highway. That was actually a infrastructure upgrade, quite important for the economy to get goods moving up north.
Yeah, well, that begs the question as to why they're thinking of closing the rail link to the north, doesn't it? Look, I ride my motorbike up that stretch of road from time to time, and I know what the congestion is like on the road with the heavy freight, and I know what the damage is that the heavy freight is doing to the road. You notice those two things when you've got two wheels and not four. What we want to do is, wherever we can, get as much on the rail lines as we can, rather than on the highway. I know there are danger spots in the Dome Valley and around that way. That's why we're saying we won't be spending $1.7 billion on a gold-plated holiday highway. We'll spend about $320 million dealing with the traffic bottlenecks around Warkworth, dealing with the black spots. But you've got to have priorities when you don't have much money. And our priority is to make sure that we can get what a world-class city needs, and that's a decent inner-city public transport system, so that we can get cars off the motorways, so the motorways are less congested, not more congested.
What's the time frame for that rail loop then?
Time frame is, I think you'll be seeing a start to that within the next couple of years. I think you'd want to see that completed probably over the next 6 years or so.
Okay, the First Leaders debate between you and John Key tonight. How are you feeling going into it?
Oh, I'm feeling pretty confident going into it. Look, John Key is very good at making easy decisions for today. But this isn't just about staying popular for the next 4 weeks before an election. This election is about the sort of future we want to build for New Zealand. And when we've had 2 credit downgrades, where the international rating agencies are saying you're not doing well enough, you're going backwards, when you've had no growth in the last quarter, when people are crying out because cost of living has gone ahead of their wages, and they haven't got the tax cuts but the very wealthy has, there's a lot to debate about. We've got a plan that will not involve selling our assets. We want to keep our assets, pay down the debt, and give middle and low income people a tax break. And the way we'll do that is by requiring people who are speculating on property just to pay their fair of tax on the profits they make.
I'm detecting a change, Phil. Have you been eating spinach? You're talking tough. It's fighting talk.
Well, these are things. Look, this election's not a beauty contest. It's not the New Zealand Next top model. This is about the future for my kids and your kids and everybody else's kids. And I'm in this situation with 3 kids in their 20s, one living in London at the moment, the other 2 skilled tradesmen thinking about going to Australia. And all I hear from the government is the answer is we'll cut wages. Well, what's going to stop another 100,000 leaving for Australia in the next 3 years, just as they have under the first 3 years of John Key's watch? I want a better New Zealand. We've got to tackle the problems. We want politicians who've got the guts to front up and tell the truth and not pretend everything's okay and leave the hard problems for somebody else to solve later when they're much harder to solve.
Phil Goff, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Good to talk to you, mate. Cheers.
Leader of the Labour Party, Phil Goff.